When a high-value man speaks to a woman, the first thing you'll notice is how little he needs to say. He's not trying to dominate the space, fill the silence, or win approval. He understands something most men overlook. Silence is not the absence of connection. Sometimes it's the deepest form of it. There is power in restraint, in the quiet between words, in the tension that builds when you're not immediately available for decoding, explaining, or performing. A high-value man recognizes that mystery is not about manipulation, it's about selectivity. Not everything needs to be verbalized. Not every emotion must be unpacked on the spot. When a man speaks less, but with intention, his presence becomes magnified. He doesn't chase attention, he draws it. He knows that clarity comes not just from articulation, but from energy. And a woman doesn't miss a man who was always there, always talking, always trying. She misses the one who left her with something unresolved, something to wonder about. That's the man who lives in her mind rent-free. This isn't about playing games or being emotionally unavailable. It's about being centered. When a man is emotionally grounded, he doesn't speak to prove his worth. He speaks when it matters. He listens, reflects, and then delivers something measured, something essential. His words have gravity because they are not diluted by noise. And because he doesn't speak out of fear or anxiety, his communication becomes a mirror. It reflects not his insecurity, but her curiosity. Psychologically, this taps into a deeper human mechanism. We value what we have to work for mentally. The mind cannot hold on to what is constantly explained. It clings to what is ambiguous, unfinished, intriguing. When a man leaves room for interpretation, not through vagueness, but through intentional silence, he activates the part of her psyche that begins to fill in the blanks. That emotional tension becomes memory. And memory, especially when tied to unresolved emotion, is what makes someone unforgettable. In contrast, when a man over-explains, over-texts, or constantly seeks reassurance, he erodes his own allure. He becomes predictable, easy to place, easy to forget. And it's not that he isn't kind or genuine. He may be both. But he has made himself fully known too quickly, too easily. He has left nothing for her imagination to carry. He has satisfied her mind before it could ever crave him. Esther Perel often speaks about eroticism as the space between what is known and what is still unknown. Desire thrives not in comfort, but in the gap between words, between glances, between moments of presence and absence. And when a high-value man speaks with restraint, he creates that very space. He doesn't drown the fire with constant reassurance. He lets it burn on its own oxygen. There is also something philosophical at play here. When a man doesn't rush to speak, he is making a statement about time. He is not operating from scarcity. He is not trying to grab the moment. He is the man who knows that his silence won't be misunderstood, because it comes from strength, not neglect. It comes from a place of self-respect. He lets the woman lean into the silence. He lets her feel the absence of noise as something intentional. And slowly, she begins to realize he doesn't need me to validate him. And that's exactly why I want him. Satisfaction to his very foundation. Let him live in their absence so we can feel with him. You see, when a man chooses silence, not as a weapon, but as a reflection, as if they're trying to win something, approval, validation, attention, you can feel the urgency in their tone, the need behind their compliments, the subtle performance in their humor. And women feel it too. That pressure to keep things flowing, to keep her entertained, to keep her interested quickly becomes repelling. Why? Because it reveals a lack of center. A man who leads from anxiety is not leading. He's chasing connection, not creating it. High-value men understand that genuine connection is not manufactured. It's a load. They don't interrogate, they invite. Their questions are grounded, open-ended, often reflective rather than transactional. Instead of, "What do you do?" they might ask, "What excites you right now?" Instead of, "Tell me about your job," they say, "What part of your life right now feels most alive?" Notice the shift. It's subtle but powerful. One seeks data, the other seeks depth. This kind of presence is deeply felt, especially in today's culture of constant digital noise and surface-level exchanges. A high-value man listens, not to respond, but to understand. He's not waiting for his turn to speak. He's attuned. And this attunement speaks volumes. It tells her, "You're not being consumed." So it's attunement. You're being met. She's not being chased. She's being chosen. Quietly, calmly, with intentionality. Psychologically, this taps into what we all crave, to feel safe and stimulated at the same time. When a man listens with presence, when his body language is relaxed, when his words are few but precise, he regulates the emotional tempo of the moment. She relaxes into it. Her nervous system feels that calm, and her desire rises in it, not because he's flashy or intense, but because he's there, with her, not above her, not beneath her, but eye level, emotionally and intellectually. There's a philosophical beauty in that. In a world that constantly screams for attention, high-value men are a quiet disruption. They don't demand space. They become space. They're not focused on controlling the conversation. They're focused on contributing to it in a way that makes it better, more real, more human. They know that being interesting is far less powerful than being interested. And paradoxically, that is what makes them unforgettable. This isn't about tactics. It's about rhythm. A high-value man knows that when he slows down the conversation, he actually deepens it. When he pauses before he speaks, when he allows silence to breathe, when he smiles instead of always explaining, that's when she leans in. That's when she begins to miss him before he's even left. Because she felt something she rarely feels. Emotional leadership. Not forced, not loud, just present. Esther Perel often speaks of eroticism as rooted in aliveness, and aliveness requires contrast between holding on and letting go, between pursuit and pause, between sound and silence. High-value men instinctively understand this. They don't rush, they don't push, they guide. And in doing so, they create an experience that is both rare and real. At the core of it all is this truth. When a man no longer speaks to impress, but to connect, his words change everything. Not just what she hears, but what she feels. And in that space, she doesn't just listen, she remembers. When a high-value man speaks, he's not just communicating, he's calibrating. Every word reflects something deeper. His values, his emotional boundaries, his self-concept. He doesn't use language to win favor or avoid conflict. He uses it to set the tone for how he expects to be treated. And this is where most men falter. They think keeping a woman interested requires endless flexibility. That saying yes, smoothing things over, staying agreeable, that's what will keep her from leaving. But in reality, it's often what makes her lose respect. A high-value man doesn't fear tension. He understands that boundaries create the very conditions for attraction to grow. When he speaks, he's not afraid to be clear about what he will and won't tolerate, not from a place of control, but from a place of inner clarity. His no isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's grounded, calm, and therefore unquestionable. He doesn't need to prove himself. He simply is. That's the paradox. The more a man tries to avoid rejection by softening his stance, the more he communicates that he doesn't trust his own worth. And subconsciously, that gets picked up immediately. He becomes malleable, predictable, and slowly invisible. But the man who can speak a truth, hold his line, and walk away if that line is crossed, that man becomes charged with value. He's not available to everyone, and that's what makes him memorable. Psychologically, this speaks to something primal. We are drawn to people who demonstrate internal order. The ability to hold a boundary is an evolutionary signal of self-sufficiency. It tells others, I don't need this interaction to complete me. And in a relationship dynamic, that energy is magnetic. Because women don't miss the man who stayed too long, trying to fix what wasn't working. They miss the man who had the strength to step back without resentment, the man who respected himself enough not to fight for what was already costing him his peace. And here's the truth. Walking away is a language of its own. You don't need to explain yourself endlessly. You don't need to give emotional lectures or write long texts filled with what you wish they understood. A simple, well-timed absence speaks louder than any argument. It says, I care, but not at the cost of myself. And that hits differently because it forces reflection. When a woman experiences a man removing himself from chaos with grace, not as punishment but as principle, it leaves an emotional echo. This is not about punishing her with silence or ghosting to assert power. That's not what we're talking about. That comes from wounded masculinity. What we're speaking of here is discernment. The wisdom to know that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both people is to let go without bitterness. A man who can do that, who doesn't fight for crumbs, who doesn't argue for dignity, communicates something that lingers. This man has standards. Philosophically, it's an act of existential responsibility to protect your time, your peace, your emotional bandwidth. It's not selfish. It's sacred. You are the steward of your energy, and the way you speak, the way you draw your lines, and the way you're willing to live when they're crossed, that defines your value far more than any words of affection or charm. We often think people miss us because of what we gave, but more often they miss us because of what they lost access to. The emotional leadership, the stability, the clarity we brought into the room. And when that's gone, truly gone, that absence becomes a mirror. She sees herself differently through the space you've created. And that's when the missing begins. So remember this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever say is nothing at all, followed by the sound of your footsteps walking away. Most men speak to women's ego. They compliment the surface, flatter what's already obvious, and aim for approval. But high-value men speak to something deeper. They speak to a woman's soul. They're not trying to seduce her attention. They're awakening her awareness. And that shift from performance to presence is everything. When you speak to someone's ego, you keep the interaction at a transactional level. You give, hoping to get something back. You tell her she's beautiful, expecting gratitude. You agree with her opinions, hoping to be liked, but none of that builds true emotional impact. Why? Because the ego is constantly hungry, it forgets quickly. The compliment that made her smile in the moment is gone by the next scroll, the next like, the next shallow exchange. There's no imprint left. High-value men don't rely on recycled lines or performative praise. They say the thing no one else sees. Maybe It's how she gets quiet when she talks about her childhood. Maybe it's the way she changes the subject when she feels vulnerable. Maybe it's how she lights up when she talks about her craft, even if no one's ever validated it. He reflects those subtle truths back to her, not to impress, but to mirror. And that kind of mirroring, that's rare. That's intimacy. Because when a woman feels deeply understood, not just heard, not just admired, but understood, it opens something ancient in her. Not desire for attention, but a longing for resonance. That's what she begins to crave. Not the man who praised her, but the man who saw her. That is the man she misses long after the conversation ends. Psychologically, we know this is tied to attachment and emotional imprinting. The people we remember most aren't those who gave us the most. They're the ones who made us feel most seen. And feeling seen is not about constant communication. It's about depth of perception. It's about presence. When a man can drop into that level of attunement, he's no longer competing with other men. He's playing a different game altogether. He's activating something that goes beyond validation. He's activating meaning. There's also a philosophical angle here worth naming. Speaking to the soul means choosing truth over comfort. A high-value man doesn't just affirm what's pleasant. He challenges what's true. He might say, "I think you're hiding behind that story." Or, "You say you don't want love, but your eyes tell a different story." These are not criticisms. They are invitations to grow, to awaken, to feel. And they land because they come from a place of care, not control. This kind of honesty is magnetic. It disrupts the autopilot of everyday conversation. It invites the other person out of their persona and into their presence. And once a woman experiences that kind of energetic contact, where someone sees her without filters, every other interaction starts to feel flat by comparison. That's the moment she starts to miss him. Not because he gave her more, but because he touched something that others never even tried to reach. This is the irony. The more a man tries to please, the more forgettable he becomes. But the man who brings her back to herself, who speaks in a way that makes her remember her own essence, he becomes unforgettable. He becomes a reference point for depth. And here's what that really comes down to. Anyone can touch a body. Some can even touch a heart. But few ever learn to touch the soul. That requires stillness, awareness, courage. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present enough to speak what others only sense. So if you want her to miss you, don't just say what she wants to hear. Say what only you can see.